Good morning, all. So I'm Chandu. So as Shanmukh mentioned, like I have around 9+ years of experience as a SQL DBA and performance tuning. All right. So today we'll be starting, so performance tuning, especially for performance tuning and optimization. Right. So this training, so it will be for around 25 days. So 25 days, so say like a training or sessions, and daily we'll be discussing around 1.5 hour or 2 hours. Right. So it depends on, the topic and the day. And so we'll continue from Monday to, sorry, Saturday, 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. IST. Right. Right. So we will be discussing each and every topic in the performance tuning. So don't worry, like if I'm talking, so any specific point, and if you're not understanding, just stop then and there and ask me if you have any questions on that particular, so area which you are not understanding what I'm discussing about. Right. So you must be already, so gone through the initial discussion video. So here the prerequisites would be nothing like, so need to be an expertise in SQL Server to go through this video, go through this training session. So, but you should have a understanding on SQL Server, right? So, because if I'm talking something, you should be able to understand that particular point. For example, let's say if I say blocking, right? So if I say like, so select query, how that executes. So you should understand that how to execute, how to open SSMS, and how to run that query. I'll explain and I'll show you, but yeah, you should have a basic understanding on database administration or SQL Server, right? That would be sufficient. And second point, if you have so understanding on Windows operating system. So we are completely into Windows operating system. We are not going to Linux or any other operating system. So if you have an understanding on Windows operating system, that would be sufficient, right? So during this course, so this is the outline, like what we are going to discuss. It is more on like, so internals and performance tuning, troubleshooting, and real-time scenarios kind of thing, right? So I'll start with SQL architecture, because this is the backbone for SQL Server, right? So we will be discussing SQL architecture, then we will be going more forward, like, so further topics and discussion. For example, so we everyone know that SQL architecture, right? So but we should know so how SQL operating system, right? So there is a SQL operating system and Windows operating system. There are two concepts, right? How SQL operating system works, right? How threads are scheduling. So I'll discuss more in detail about threads, scheduling, and all. Don't worry about it. But we should understand SQL operating system as well, right? To uh, to troubleshoot the issues, performance issues in a better way. Then we'll go forward and we'll discuss, so memory, IO, CPU, storage, so then query performance, and so few scenarios if you have any issues, kind of, so high CPU, like you must have heard or seen like high CPU utilization on server, like what to do, right? So where to go next, what to do, right? So likewise, high memory utilization, either a SQL is actually utilizing the memory, or is there anything else that is causing the memory to grow high, or memory utilization. So basically, whenever memory utilization, then we will go to here and task manager, and we'll say, so memory utilization is 66, and when you see SQL Server is utilizing only 62 MB, right? So this is your SQL Server memory. So is it actually so ideal to go here task manager and see memory utilization and all? So we will go through every scenario, and not every scenario, but mostly all topics, and we'll cover, so whatever required for you to troubleshoot the performance issues, right? So then we'll start architecture. And before we starting, so I'll just high level overview, like, so what and how you will understand the performance issues, right? So if you have any questions, so stop and ask me, or you can raise your hand, or you can just, so unmute yourself and ask questions, right? So that um, I will clarify the doubts then and there, right? Yep. So any questions so far? Any doubts before we start? This so ER diagram is not only for SQL architecture. So in general, I will tell, like, so what this is just, so I have drawn this and to identify where to go, right? If there is an issue, where to go, right? So if you have any questions, you can ask, or if you have any doubts, you can ask me. Otherwise, I'll just go ahead and discuss. No questions? Okay, cool. So yeah, let's say, like, so basically you get in, so you all are working, right? So, or anyone who is not working here? Okay, that's fine. So that we will discuss in person. Let's say, so your application team or your, users are complaining that there is a performance issues, right? So if there is a performance issues, like, so what you'll do next, right? So where you will go? So you will, so first you will check the entire application is slow, or, so specific query, so a specific query is slow. So based on that, the troubleshooting will start. First question you should ask, like, so the entire application, queries, whatever executing from the application are slow, or any specific job or application query is slow, so, right? So for example, let's say if the entire application is slow, then it consider it as a general performance. So general performance. If a specific query is slow, then we consider that as a query performance. Individual query will have to troubleshoot. Let's consider it is a general performance, right? So what are all under this general performance are CPU bottleneck. There can be a CPU issue. So bottleneck we consider as a terminology if there is any performance issues in the environment, right? There is, so we'll have to check if there is any CPU issue or memory or IO. IO is basically, whenever there is a high number of reads or writes is happening, we consider that as a IO issue. There are some points which we need to consider to troubleshoot, right? I will explain that in detail. Or if there is any blocking or any wait types, right? So we will discuss more in detail all these areas. So if it is so waiting, or if there is any high CPU utilization or anything, then reconfigure the settings. So then we'll have to check if there is any wrongly configured parameters, right? For example, max degree of parallelism or cost threshold for parallelism. So those points are wrongly configured. So then we'll have to correct them and we'll have to work on those issues, right? So this is a general performance. Overall server performance we'll have to take care of. If it is a query, then we'll have to identify that query and get the execution plan, and so we'll troubleshoot, right? So I just segregated this into query performance and general performance. This is just a high level, so how we will be going through, right? Right. So this is the, so understanding of performance, so tuning that we need to go over, right? So any questions before we start? So I'll be starting the SQL architecture now. So any questions? Or any suggestions or any questions that you have at this point?
No.
Cool. So you can feel free to, so stop me and ask questions. No issues, right? Cool. Right. So this is the main components of the SQL Server architecture, right? So SQL Server, this was a, so whole diagram, but you can consider, you can still consider this as a valid, and so whatever components that we have in the architecture are intact, like so are valid to consider, right? So these are the main components that we have. First is a network library. There are 4-layer architecture, or so multiple layer architecture. So first is a network library. So what is network library? For example, let's say uh, you have so let's open, I will just maybe, right? So this is so communication. So this, like, consider it as a client, it as a server, right? So these two should be communicate each other, right? So if your client is nothing but you can consider any application. For example, let's say so in day-to-day life we are using IRCTC or make my trip or book my show. Whatever application we consider that as a client application, right? So whenever you open any query, it has to execute on the SQL server, right? So it has to execute on the SQL server. It has to connect through some library, network interface or network library, right? So this interface, we call it as a net library. There are so mainly three network libraries we have. So one is shared memory, right? So I'll just make a note here so that you will. So I'll share you the documentation, don't worry about it. So I'll share you the documents, and I'll share you the video so recording sessions, and I'll give you the scripts that we use. So everything I'll share, and I'll give you the permissions to record yourself as well, right? So don't worry about what I'm typing, but here, just for your, consider this as a rough notes for the session. All right. So there are network libraries. So what libraries we have? One is shared memory, right? So shared memory, TCP IP, uh, shared memory, TCP IP. So another one is, so I forgot, just a moment.
Named pipes.
Yeah, sorry, named pipes, right? So there are three main network libraries that we have. Shared memory. So I'll just give you a high level overview. What are these three so network libraries are. So shared memory is, for example, let's say you have so application and SQL server both are on the same computer. So the so it is sharing between application and SQL server. So we consider that as a shared memory network library, right? Say shared memory protocol or network library. TCP IP is, like, say, for example, if you connected through the wide area network, WAN, right? So if you connected through the network, wide area network, so we consider it as a TCP IP protocol or TCP IP network, right? Whereas named pipes are a local area connection. For example, let's say you have a server and and client are within the range, right? So within the same, consider as a society or locality or subnet. So we consider as a local area network where we communicate each other, right? So that is basically called as a named pipes. Right. So how SQL Server and so application will communicate each other. So if you are using SQL Server and application within the so for example, let's say SQL Server you are using, and application client server, and whatever client is using the network library or network protocol, so SQL Server should have the same network library or same communication, right? So understand. So this is SQL, this is a client. So if client is using TCP IP, server also we should have TCP IP communication to communicate the traffic or to communicate so each other. If client is using network named pipes, so SQL Server we should have same so network library named pipes. If it is shared memory, then we should have the shared memory network library to be enabled from the server and commuter server and client, right? So then the communication will be happen through here, right? So the network library, then user mode scheduler. So sorry. Right, so user mode scheduler, so this is what we consider as a SQL OS. Earlier we used it to call as a user mode scheduler or UMS. So later we converted, or like later it named as a SQL OS, operating system. So we have a detailed session like how this works and how so how UMS works, or why we call it as a user mode scheduler. So we will discuss that later in detail. So for now, understand this is a SQL OS where the threads are scheduling on the operating system. So we will discuss detail on SQL OS or user mode scheduler. So don't worry about it. Then we have a relational engine. So relational engine where we have so actual work is so happen here, right? So we have different components. I will explain detail so relational engine, how that works, and also we have a detailed architecture, and I'll give you a select and update query, and I'll explain that. So for now, understand, so these are the components that we use, right? So relational engine, and we have so for example, let's say ODS, right? So ODS is a open data services. So it's considered it as a interface between so client and relational engine, right? So how that works, I'll explain. This is your client, this is your server, right? So ODS, you can consider that as a interface between open data source or open data services. So it is an interface, right? So whenever you send any communication to the SQL server, it will be sending through the network, and it will be sending through ODS to the SQL server, right? So it is in between network layer and the SQL server layer. Whenever you send any communication, so the ODS is the one which receives the client communication, and then it will be sent to the SQL server network library. So what does it mean? So whenever you send a any communication through the client, so client, so we have, I told you, right? So we have a network library. We call that a server network interface at the client side, SNI. So SQL server side also we have something called SNI, server network library. This is a client side server network library. It is the server side server network library. So whenever you send any request from the client to the server, so these requests will be converted as a TDS packets, right? So TDS packets. TDS packets is a tabular data stream packets. It's a kind of, so network packets where we will be sending our data from one so point to another point through the network, right? So because network doesn't understand your queries, right? So it has to be able to identify the packets, and we will be sending. So this TDS, let's say for example, you are executing select statement from table. So if you execute a select statement, this select statement will be converted into a TDS packets. Who will be converting this TDS packets? This is the driver. So where we have here, so client side driver. So client side driver, it can be so OLEDB driver or ODBC driver or native client, right? So we have different drivers supported, right? So OLEDB or ODBC driver or native client driver. So this will be sent to the, this will be converted, this request into a TDS packets, right? So this will be converted in the drivers, and it will be sent to the server through network, right? So what it exactly contains, what TDS packet exactly contains, it contains the information, right? For example, let's say you have these many columns or data types of these columns, and so the maybe query text and that information will be converted and wrapped into the TDS packets. Wrapping is nothing but wrapping all these into a single packet, right? So single TDS packets. It's a just kind of, wrapper, right? You have a chocolate and you will be wrapping that, right? It is a kind of that wrapper we have, and in that packet we contains this information. TDS packets we contains that SQL columns, data types, and so what we are sending, right? So this TDS packets will be converted. It will be sent through the network to SQL Server. So this SQL Server, I told you ODS, Open Data Services we have, and it receives that TDS packets, right? So it receives that packets, TDS packets through the ODS, and it will be sent from ODS to server-side network interface library. So why this ODS is required, right? So why this ODS is required is it has basically, so I would say like two inputs units. So one is for successful messages, one for successful packets, another one is for cancellation or attention or something. So it will monitor the query, so whether if there is any cancellation events or if there is any, so any queries which needs to be cancelled or cancelled by the SQL Server or cancelled by the anything like, so that will identify that ODS input packets, input stream, so that it will monitor the queries and so it will pass that information further, right? So this, you don't worry about ODS if it is confusing, but so you can consider that as a server side client interface. Any questions? So if you don't have any questions, just mute yourself. Okay. Cool. Yeah, so this is the ODS and this is a network interface library. So this TDS package will be sent to the network interface library, where this network interface library will unwrap this packet. So here also SQL Server also we have so drivers, right? So once it is received by the SQL Server network interface library, the TCP IP are named by shared memory. So this will be unwrapped. So whatever TDS package will be unwrapped here. Unwrapped is nothing but, so it will just so remove the wrappers into it. It will be converted into a normal text which SQL Server can understand, right? So it will be unwrap these packets and it will be sent to the further steps, right? Further process, right? So I will explain. For now, just understand this is an SNA packet where we have and so we'll be sending that, we'll be unwrapping this TDS packets, right? So this is the main so relational engine. And so this is the communicator. OLEDB is a communicator between relational engine and storage engine, right? So OLEDB is a provider, is a driver where it communicates, where it uses to communicate, right? So between the relational engine and storage engine, right? So this is the IO manager. IO manager is basically whenever you need or read the data, right? Or write the data, whatever it is. So it has to do either so synchronous IO or asynchronous IO. So we will be discussing details about the IO manager. Don't worry, I will talk asynchronous IO or scatter gather IO, what is that and how that is used, right? So how that works, I will discuss in detail, so don't worry about it, right? So whenever you need a page from the disk or whenever you want to write data to the disk, so it is fall under this IO manager. Or whenever you do checkpointing, so whenever SQL performs lazy writer, right? So everything will be fall under this IO manager, because this is doing some read or write operations. So Windows 32 API. So API is nothing but application program interface. This is a lower level of your so architecture. So lower level I mentioned because whatever we perform, so that is all under so Windows operating system, and this is the API. So we work. So why 32 I mentioned? So mostly or everything we consider is under Windows 32 API, right? So Windows 32 some API, so application program interface is nothing but a kind of code. So we have developed, Windows operating system developers has developed, and that is integrated with the applications, right? So any applications we run on the Windows operating system will fall under this Windows 32 API, right? Right. So let's consider so select statement. So I will explain that so that you will understand in a better way, right? So we'll consider a select statement, and I'll explain how that works. And so whenever we execute a select statement, and how that go through each and every component of the SQL Server. And just a reminder, like so we have 4 minute session, 4 minutes, the session will be ended. So you just join the same link, so to continue, right? Cool. Once it is disconnected, join the same link, right? So yeah, this is the basic typical so diagram. So I will explain how that works whenever you execute a select statement. So let's consider a simple select statement which we don't have any, so joins or uh, we don't have anything. It's just simple select statement. Let's consider any select statement. Select is Adventure Works, select star from, select star from, right? So just consider a simple select statement. So we execute this and we get the result, right? So whatever we get, so we get the result, so of the data, right? These many rows we retrieved, so we have this many rows. How this select query works internally, we should understand how this works. First, it again, so it go through the network libraries, client side and server side network library. Let's say this is an application which it triggers this query, or SSMS which executes this query, right? SSMS can be in a different server, right? So consider this SSMS is just a user interface where we have in a different computer. You can consider it as a client or whatever, right? So that select query will be converted into a TDS package, tabular data stream package, right? So as I said, like it contains a data types, columns, so table information that will have into a TDS package, and that will be wrapped. And once it is wrapped into a TDS package at the client side, it will be sent to the server side network interface with the same TDS packet, right? So because server and client should be understanding what we are sending through the network, right? So we are sending TDS packets and server network interface library. This is the protocol layer. It receives the TDS packets, and the server side client, server side drivers, right? So we have, I told you, we have some drivers, right? Each side, client side and server side, that will be unwrap this packet, right? It will be converted as a text. As soon as it is unwrapped, then the text will be visible and exposed. And the SQL language event, so language event is nothing but you are executing query, right? So this is query will be sent to the command parser, right? So this is where we call it as a relational engine. So relational engine, so it receives a the protocol layer sends a language event to the command parser, where the command parser, what exactly command parser do? So it checks whether if there is any syntactical errors, right? So syntactical errors, for example, select star from person.person, right? So I will tell you what is this person. I think you already know that it is a schema, right? So it is a table name. right? If you execute this and if you just try to parse it, this is what we call it as a parser. And if you parse it, you get an error as syntactical errors. This is what command parser does, right? It will validate if there is any syntactical errors and it will send back to the